The rain fell hard on the streets of New York City that October evening. Maria Delgado pulled her old coat tighter around her shoulders as she hurried toward Carnegie Hall. Her black dress, bought 3 years ago from a thrift store, was getting wet at the edges. She had an umbrella, but it broke last week, and she hadn't had time to buy a new one. Maria was 47 years old and worked as a janitor at Mount Sinai Hospital. She had been cleaning floors and emptying trash cans there for 15 years. Tonight was special, though. Tonight she wasn't going to work. She had a ticket to the Steinway piano competition at Carnegie Hall, one of the most famous music halls in the world. The ticket cost $15. It was for standing room only, which meant she would have to stand in the back during the whole concert. Maria had saved this money by not eating lunch for 2 weeks. Instead of buying sandwiches from the hospital cafeteria, she ate crackers and peanut butter that she brought from home. Every dollar she saved went toward this ticket. As Maria approached Carnegie Hall, she saw expensive cars pulling up to the main entrance. Men in black suits and women in beautiful gowns stepped out. They walked under a covered area so they didn't get wet. Maria went around to the side entrance, the one used by employees. Her wet shoes made squeaking sounds on the floor as she walked inside. The lobby was the most beautiful room Maria had ever seen. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling like frozen stars. The floor was made of marble that shone like a mirror. Everywhere she looked, there were rich people talking and laughing. Their jewelry sparkled under the lights. Their perfume filled the air with expensive smells. Maria felt very small and out of place. She held her ticket tightly in her hand. The paper was a little damp from the rain. She walked carefully, trying not to bump into anyone. But even though she was careful, people still noticed her. Not in a good way. A security guard walked up to her. He was a tall man with a serious face. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "Are you looking for someone?" Maria showed him her ticket. "I'm here for the concert," she said quietly. The guard looked at the ticket, then looked at Maria. He seemed confused. "This is for the piano competition," he said slowly, as if Maria might not understand. "Yes, I know," Maria said. "I want to watch." The guard stared at her wet coat and simple dress. Then he pointed toward the back of the hall. "Standing room is over there," he said. Maria walked where he pointed. A few minutes later, another guard stopped her. "The cleaning staff entrance is downstairs," he said. "I'm not here to work," Maria said, showing her ticket again. "I'm here for the concert." This guard also looked surprised. He checked her ticket carefully as if it might be fake. Finally, he let her pass. An usher in a red jacket showed Maria where to stand. It was in the very back corner behind a large marble pillar. From there, Maria could barely see the stage. She had to lean to one side to see around the pillar. When she did this, she could see the beautiful grand piano waiting in the center of the stage. It was black and shiny, and the lights made it glow. More people came into the hall. They all had seats. Good seats where they could see everything. Maria watched them sit down in their red velvet chairs. She remained standing in her corner, her feet already getting tired in her old shoes. The competition was about to begin. Maria had read about it in a newspaper someone left on the subway. Young pianists from all over the world came to play. The winner would get $50,000 and a chance to play with the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. Famous judges would decide who was the best. Maria loved classical music. When she was young in Poland before she came to America, she had dreamed of being a pianist. Life had taken her in a different direction, but she never stopped loving the music. Sometimes, when she cleaned the hospital late at night, she would hum piano concertos. The other janitors thought she was strange, but Maria didn't care. The lights in the hall dimmed. People stopped talking. The competition was starting. The judges walked onto the stage and sat at a long table on the side. The main judge was Maestro Alessandro Volpe. Maria recognized him from pictures in music magazines at the library. He was an old man with white hair and a stern face. He was one of the most famous conductors in the world. The first contestant came on stage. She was a young woman in a sparkly dress. She bowed to the audience, sat at the piano, and began to play. Her fingers moved fast and perfect across the keys. Every note was exactly right. The audience watched quietly. When she finished, everyone clapped politely. The second contestant was a young man from Japan. He also played perfectly. Then came a teenager from Russia, then a woman from France. They all played beautifully. Their technique was flawless. During the intermission, people went to the lobby for champagne and small foods on silver trays. Maria stayed in her corner. She couldn't afford the $20 for a glass of wine. She listened to the conversations around her. Two of the judges were talking near her corner. They didn't notice Maria standing in the shadows. They all play perfectly, one judge said, sounding bored. But where is the feeling? Where is the soul? Maestro Volpe nodded. Modern pianists are like machines, he said. They play every note correctly, but they forget that music is about emotion. It's about life, pain, joy, love. These young people play like they've never really lived. Maria's hands moved without her thinking about it. Her fingers played invisible keys on her thigh. She knew what the maestro meant. She had heard it too. The contestants played the notes but not the music. They played with their hands but not with their hearts. The bell rang, telling everyone to return to their seats. Maria watched the rich people walk back into the hall, talking about their vacation homes and their children's private schools. She thought about her own two daughters, who had gone to public school and worked hard for everything they had. The second half of the competition began. More contestants played. More perfect notes filled the hall. Maria watched and listened, her heart both happy to hear the music and sad about something she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the memory of her own dreams, long ago before life became about surviving instead of living. She didn't know that soon, very soon, everything would change. She didn't know that in just a few minutes she would do something that would shock everyone in this beautiful hall. For now she just stood in her corner, a simple woman that nobody noticed, listening to music that made her remember who she used to be. 20 minutes passed in the second half of the competition. 3 more young pianists had performed. Each one played without mistakes, but Maria could feel the audience getting restless. People were checking their phones. Some were whispering to each other. Even from her corner behind the pillar, Maria could sense that something was wrong. The stage manager, a thin woman with glasses, rushed onto the stage. She looked worried. She went straight to Maestro Volpe and whispered in his ear. The maestro's face changed. He looked annoyed, then concerned. He stood up from the judges' table and walked to the center of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone. His voice had a slight Italian accent. "We have a small problem. Our next contestant, James Chen, has been delayed. He was in a minor car accident. He is not hurt, but he is stuck in traffic and cannot get here in time for his slot." People in the audience started talking. This was unusual. These competitions were planned very carefully. Every minute was scheduled. The maestro continued. "We will need to take another short break while we reorganize the schedule." Maria watched as the stage manager talked frantically on her phone. The other judges looked frustrated. Some people in the audience were already standing up to leave for another intermission. They looked bored and annoyed. Something strange happened inside Maria at that moment. It was like a voice from deep within her, a voice she hadn't heard in 25 years. It was the voice of the young woman she used to be, before her husband got sick, before she sold her piano, before she became invisible, before she could stop herself, before she could think about what she was doing. Maria stepped out from behind the pillar. "I can play," she said. Her voice wasn't very loud, but in the quiet hall everyone heard her. Every head in the audience turned to look at her. The maestro stopped walking. The stage manager stopped talking on her phone. Everyone stared at Maria. She stood there in her simple black dress and old shoes. Her gray hair was pulled back in a plain bun. Her hands, rough from years of cleaning, hung at her sides. She looked nothing like the other contestants with their fancy clothes and confident faces. Someone in the audience laughed. It was a mean laugh, the kind that makes fun of someone. Then another person laughed. Soon many people were smiling and shaking their heads. "Madam," the maestro said from the stage. His voice was cold and dismissive. "This is a professional competition. These pianists have trained for years at the best schools in the world." Maria walked forward. Each step echoed in the hall. People moved aside to let her pass, but they looked at her like she was crazy. She could hear them whispering, "Who is she? Is this some kind of joke? Security should remove her." How embarrassing. But Maria kept walking. She reached the stairs that led up to the stage. The stage manager moved to block her way. "Ma'am, you need to return to your seat," she said firmly. Maria looked her in the eye. "Just give me 3 minutes," she said. Her voice was calm but strong. "If I'm wasting your time, I'll leave immediately. You need someone to fill the time anyway. What do you have to lose?" The stage manager looked at the maestro. He was staring at Maria with a mixture of amusement and annoyance. He studied her for a long moment. Then he shrugged his shoulders. "Why not?" he said with a sarcastic smile. "We need entertainment while we wait for Mr. Chen. Please, madam, show us what you can do." He said it like it was a joke. The audience understood it was a joke. Some people took out their phones to record what would surely be an embarrassing moment. Maria climbed the stairs to the stage. They seemed very long. The lights were bright and hot on her face. The piano looked enormous up close, like a beautiful black monster waiting to swallow her. She walked to the piano bench and sat down. It was too high for her. She had to adjust it, turning the knobs on the side. This took a while. People in the audience laughed again. Someone in the third row said loudly, "This is ridiculous." Maria's hands were shaking a little, not from fear but from emotion. She hadn't sat at a grand piano in over 20 years. The bench felt familiar and strange at the same time. She put her feet on the pedals. They barely reached. She looked at the keys. They were perfect, white and black, waiting. She thought about her husband, David. He had loved to hear her play. When he was dying, when he couldn't speak anymore because of his illness, she would hum his favorite pieces to him. He would close his eyes and smile. She thought about her daughters, Anna and Sophie. They had never heard her play. They didn't even know she could play. She had never told them about her life before, about the competitions she had won, about the dreams she had given up for love and then for survival. She thought about the donated piano in the children's ward at the hospital. 6 months ago, someone had given it to the hospital. It was old and some keys didn't work quite right, but Maria had started playing it during her 3 a.m. breaks. When the ward was quiet and the sick children were sleeping, she would sit and play very softly. It made her feel alive again. The maestro cleared his throat loudly. He was standing near the piano now, ready to escort her off the stage when she embarrassed herself. The audience was quiet, waiting for the disaster to happen. Maria put her hands on the keys. They felt cool and smooth. She closed her eyes. In her mind, she wasn't in Carnegie Hall anymore. She was in her small apartment in Warsaw, young and full of hope, playing for David for the first time. She was in the hospital room, holding his hand as he died. She was in the children's ward at 3 a.m., playing for the sleeping babies who didn't know if they would live or die. She began to play. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the hall. But it wasn't the Rachmaninoff that the other contestants had played. It wasn't perfect and mechanical. It was raw and real and full of pain and beauty. Maria's fingers found the keys like they were old friends. The music poured out of her, 25 years of silence breaking like a dam. She played the sadness of watching someone you love die slowly. She played the exhaustion of working 3 jobs to feed your children. She played the loneliness of 3 a.m. hospital corridors. She played the small joys. A daughter's graduation, a patient's smile, a moment of beauty in an ugly world. The maestro, who had been standing ready to stop her, slowly stepped backward. His face changed. The sarcastic smile disappeared. His eyes grew wide. The audience stopped whispering. Phones that were held up to record a joke were slowly lowered. People leaned forward in their seats. Maria didn't notice any of this. She was lost in the music. Her whole body moved with the rhythm. Her rough hands flew across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible. She wasn't playing the piano. She was telling her story through it. Every note was a word. Every phrase was a sentence. Every movement was a chapter of her life. The music filled Carnegie Hall like it had never been filled before. It wasn't just sound. It was emotion made audible. It was life itself, complicated and messy and beautiful and tragic, pouring from the fingers of a woman everyone had dismissed. The maestro stood frozen, watching Maria play. A single tear ran down his cheek, though he didn't seem to notice. He was hearing something he thought didn't exist anymore. Music played with absolute truth, without pretense, without trying to impress anyone. Music played from the soul. Maria's fingers danced across the piano keys like they had never stopped playing. The music that came from the grand piano was unlike anything the audience had heard that evening. Where the young contestants had played with technical precision, Maria played with her whole life story written in every note. The Rachmaninoff concerto was famous for being difficult. It required strength and delicacy, power and gentleness. Most pianists played it to show off their skill. Maria played it like she was having a conversation with an old friend. Her left hand created deep, rumbling bass notes that sounded like thunder in the distance. Her right hand sang the melody like a bird that had been caged for years and was finally free. In the third row, a woman who had been checking her phone throughout the evening slowly put it away. She stared at Maria with her mouth slightly open. Her husband, who had been dozing off, sat up straight in his chair. All around the hall, the same thing was happening. People who had been bored were now completely focused on the small woman at the piano. Maria played a passage that usually sounded aggressive and showy. In her hands, it became something else. It was the sound of scrubbing hospital floors at midnight while worrying about paying rent. It was the sound of singing lullabies to sick children who had no visitors. It was the sound of dreams that had been put away but never really died. The maestro had moved closer to the piano. He stood just a few feet away from Maria, watching her hands move. His face showed many emotions: surprise, recognition, wonder, and something that looked like pain. He knew this music. He had conducted it hundreds of times with the best pianists in the world. But he had never heard it played like this. Maria came to the slow part of the concerto. This was where most pianists tried to be romantic and pretty. Maria played it like a widow remembering her husband. Each note was a memory. The high notes were laughter from better days. The low notes were tears cried alone at night. Together they made a song of love and loss that was so honest, so real, that people in the audience began to cry without knowing why. A judge at the table, a stern woman from Germany who never showed emotion, wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. A young man in the balcony who had come to support his girlfriend in the competition found himself thinking about his grandmother, who had died last year. A rich woman in the front row remembered being young and poor and full of dreams, before she married for money instead of love. Maria didn't know she was making people feel these things. She was lost in the music. Her eyes were closed and her body swayed with the rhythm. Sometimes she would lean back as if the music was pulling her. Sometimes she would bend forward, as if she was pushing the sound out with her whole being. She played a fast section that required incredible finger strength and control. Young pianists often stumbled here or played it too carefully. Maria attacked it like a warrior. Her hands flew so fast they seemed to blur, but it wasn't just speed. Every note was clear and purposeful. It was the sound of a woman who had fought for everything she had, who had never given up even when life tried to break her. Sweat appeared on Maria's forehead. Playing like this was hard work, but she didn't stop or slow down. If anything, she played with more intensity. The piano seemed to come alive under her touch. The strings inside vibrated with power. The wooden body resonated like it was singing along. The maestro stepped back until he was at the edge of the stage. His whole body was tense, like he was holding his breath. He watched Maria's face, which showed every emotion as she played. Sometimes she looked peaceful. Sometimes she looked fierce. Sometimes she looked so sad that it hurt to watch her. In the audience, people had stopped thinking about their expensive clothes and their important lives. They were all watching Maria, this simple woman in her old dress, as she did something magical. She was taking a piece of music they thought they knew and showing them what it really meant. She was teaching them that music wasn't about perfection, it was about truth. Maria reached the famous climax of the concerto. This was the moment when the orchestra would usually come in with full force. But there was no orchestra, just Maria and the piano. She played like she was the entire orchestra. Her left hand created the deep, powerful sound of cellos and basses. Her right hand soared like violins. She used the pedals to make the sound bigger, fuller, until it seemed impossible that one person was making all this music. The audience couldn't believe what they were seeing and hearing. Some people stood up without realizing it, drawn to their feet by the power of the performance. Others sat frozen, afraid to move and break the spell. A few people were openly crying now, not caring who saw them. Maria played the final section of the piece. This was supposed to be triumphant, victorious. Most pianists played it like they were celebrating winning a battle. Maria played it differently. She played it like someone who had survived, not won. She played it like every day she got up and went to work was a victory. She played it like every time she chose love over bitterness was a triumph. The last notes of the concerto rang out through Carnegie Hall. Maria held her hands above the keys for a moment, then slowly lowered them to her lap. She kept her eyes closed, still lost in the world of the music. Her chest rose and fell as she caught her breath. Sweat had made strands of her gray hair stick to her forehead. For a few seconds, the hall was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was like time had stopped. The audience sat in stunned silence, trying to understand what they had just experienced. Then the maestro started to clap. His applause was slow at first, deliberate, each clap ringing out in the silence. Then he clapped faster, harder. Tears were streaming down his face, but he didn't wipe them away. One by one, people in the audience began to clap too. First just a few, then more, then everyone. They rose to their feet as they applauded. The sound grew until it was thunderous, echoing off the walls and ceiling of the great hall. People who hadn't stood for any of the young contestants were standing now, clapping until their hands hurt. Maria finally opened her eyes. She looked confused, as if she had forgotten where she was. She saw the maestro standing in front of her, crying and clapping. She saw the audience on their feet. She couldn't understand what was happening. She had just played the piano. That was all. She had just told her story the only way she knew how. The maestro walked to Maria and took her hand. It was rough and calloused from years of cleaning, but he held it like it was precious. He helped her stand and led her to the front of the stage. The applause grew even louder. Maria looked out at all the faces. These rich, important people were looking at her with respect, with awe, with something that looked like gratitude. She didn't understand it. She was just a janitor who had played a song. But the maestro understood. He had just witnessed something rare and beautiful. He had heard music played the way it was meant to be played, not as a performance, but as a confession, a prayer, a piece of a human soul shared with the world. And he knew, looking at Maria's confused face, that she had no idea how extraordinary she was. The applause continued for what seemed like forever. Maria stood on the stage, holding the maestro's hand, looking overwhelmed and confused. She had never expected this reaction. She had just wanted to fill the empty time slot, to play the piano one more time in a real concert hall. Now hundreds of people were on their feet, clapping for her like she was somebody important. Finally, the maestro raised his other hand, asking for quiet. The applause slowly died down. People sat back in their seats, but they kept their eyes on Maria. Everyone wanted to know who this woman was, where she had come from, how she could play like that. The maestro looked at Maria carefully. He studied her face like he was trying to remember something. His eyes went from her gray hair to her brown eyes to the shape of her hands. Then his expression changed. His eyes grew wide with recognition and shock. "Maria Delgado," he said slowly, testing the name. Then he said something that made Maria's heart stop. "But that's not your real name, is it? You used to be Maria Kowalski." Maria's face went pale. She hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in over 20 years. It belonged to a different person, a different life. A life she had buried along with her husband. She could only nod, unable to speak. The maestro turned to face the audience. His voice shook with emotion as he spoke into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to tell you something extraordinary. 27 years ago, I was a professor at the Warsaw Conservatory in Poland. I taught many talented students, but there was one who was special. Her name was Maria Kowalski." People in the audience leaned forward, listening intently. Some were already pulling out their phones to search for the name. The maestro continued. "Maria was not just talented. She was a genius. At the age of 20, she won the Chopin International Competition for Young Pianists. Do you understand what that means? It's one of the most prestigious competitions in the world. She competed against hundreds of the best young pianists and won first place." Gasps came from the audience. Several people who knew about classical music recognized the importance of what the maestro was saying. The Chopin competition was legendary. Winners went on to have major careers, playing in the best concert halls, recording albums, becoming famous. "Maria was my best student," the maestro said, his voice thick with emotion. "I had never taught anyone with such natural ability combined with such deep understanding of music. She didn't just play notes. She understood the soul of every piece. I told her she would be one of the greatest pianists of her generation." He paused and looked at Maria, who was staring at the floor. Then suddenly she disappeared. Right after winning the competition, when recording companies were fighting to sign her, when concert halls around the world wanted to book her, she vanished. I tried to find her. We all did, but she was gone like she had never existed. The maestro walked closer to Maria. "What happened to you?" he asked gently. "Where did you go?" Maria looked up. The entire hall was silent, waiting for her answer. She walked slowly to the microphone. Her voice was quiet and unsteady at first. "I fell in love," she said simply. His name was David Delgado. He was an American doctor working in a free clinic in Warsaw. He was kind and funny, and he loved music. We met at a coffee shop near the conservatory. He didn't know who I was, didn't care that I had won competitions. He just liked me for me. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When I won the Chopin competition, everyone wanted me to tour, to record, to become famous. But David had to return to America. His visa was ending, and he had commitments at a hospital in New York. I had to choose. A woman in the audience whispered to her husband. She gave up everything for love. Maria heard her and nodded. Yes, I chose love. I married David and moved to New York. I thought I could still play here, maybe teach. But life had other plans. David got sick 5 years after we married. ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. His body slowly stopped working. He needed constant care. Her voice got stronger as she told her story. I became his nurse. We couldn't afford professional help. I sold everything to pay for his medical bills and equipment. The piano was the last thing to go. It broke my heart to sell it, but we needed the money for a special wheelchair. The audience was completely silent. Some people were wiping their eyes. David died after 3 years of illness, Maria continued. I was alone with 2 young daughters, aged 7 and 5. I had no money, no piano, no connections in America. I had been out of the music world for 8 years. My hands were weak from not practicing, so I got a job cleaning offices at night. Then I got a second job cleaning at the hospital during the day. That's what I've been doing for 15 years. The maestro looked stunned. But your talent, he said. How could you just stop? Maria smiled sadly. Talent doesn't pay rent. Talent doesn't buy food for hungry children. I did what I had to do. My daughters needed a mother who worked, not a mother who dreamed of concerts. They both finished high school, went to college on scholarships. Anna is a nurse now. Sophie is studying to be a teacher. They are good girls. Do they know? The maestro asked. Do they know who you were? Maria shook her head. No, I never told them. What would be the point? It would only make them sad for me. They know their father was a good man who died. They know their mother works hard. That's enough. Someone in the audience called out, but you can still play. We just heard you. Maria turned toward the voice. 6 months ago, someone donated an old piano to the children's ward at my hospital. It's out of tune and some keys stick, but it plays. I started practicing during my night shifts when the ward is quiet. 3 in the morning is a good time. Nobody bothers you. The sick children seem to sleep better when I play softly. She looked at her hands. I didn't know if I could still play properly. My hands are different now. They're older, rougher, but the music was still inside me, waiting. It had been waiting for 25 years. The maestro took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, do you understand what we've witnessed tonight? This is not just a woman who plays piano well. This is Maria Kowalski, who was destined to be one of the greatest pianists in the world. She gave it all up for love, for family, for survival. And yet, after 25 years of silence, she can still play like this. She's been practicing on an old, out-of-tune piano in a hospital at 3 in the morning. And she just gave one of the most moving performances I've ever heard. He turned to Maria. You said you played tonight because we needed someone to fill time. But I think there's more to it. I think music has been calling you back. I think you're ready to answer that call. Maria looked overwhelmed. I'm 47 years old, she said. I'm a janitor. That part of my life is over. No, the maestro said firmly. It's not over. It was interrupted. There's a difference. Maria, you have a gift. Not just talent. Anyone can have talent. You have something rarer. You have lived. You have suffered and survived and loved and lost. And all of that comes through your music. That's why everyone in this hall is crying. That's why we're all standing here stunned by what we've heard. He addressed the audience again. We live in a world that worships youth and perfection. We forget that music is about human experience. Tonight, Maria Kowalski reminded us what music is really for. It's not for showing off. It's for sharing our humanity. The judges at the table were conferring with each other, whispering intensely. The head judge stood up and walked to the microphone. This is highly unusual, she said. But these are unusual circumstances. We would like to offer Maria Kowalski an honorary place in this competition and a special recognition award. The audience erupted in applause again, but Maria looked uncertain. She was thinking about her job, her daughters, Her simple life that was so far from this world of concert halls and competitions. She had built a different life, a quiet life. Did she want to change it now? The head judge waited for Maria's answer. The entire audience held their breath. Would she accept the special recognition? Would she return to the world of classical music after all these years? Maria stood quietly for a long moment. She thought about her life, her daughters, her work at the hospital. Then she spoke into the microphone. "Thank you for this honor," she said. "But I need to tell you something. I am not the same Maria Kowalski who won that competition 27 years ago. That girl was young and believed music was everything. The woman standing here knows that life is more complicated than that." The maestro started to protest, but Maria raised her hand gently. "Please let me finish. I will accept your award, but I have a condition. I don't want prize money for myself. I want something else." The judges looked at each other, confused. The head judge asked, "What do you want?" Maria took a deep breath. $50,000 is the prize money, yes? I want to use it to start a program. A music program for people like me. For the night workers, the cleaners, the forgotten ones. For the children whose parents work 3 jobs and can't afford piano lessons. For the sick children in hospitals who might die before they ever hear beautiful music. The audience was silent. Maria continued, her voice growing stronger. "You see, for 6 months I've been playing piano in the children's cancer ward at 3 in the morning. Sometimes I play for babies who are dying. Sometimes I play for teenagers who are scared. They don't care that I'm just a janitor. They only care that the music makes them feel less alone." She looked directly at the maestro. "You say I have a gift. Maybe I do. But gifts are meant to be shared, not hoarded. I don't need to be famous. I don't need recordings or tours. I'm too old for that life anyway. But I can teach. I can play for people who need music but can't afford concert tickets." A man in the audience stood up. He was well-dressed and looked important. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm Robert Harrison, CEO of Harrison Industries. If you create this program, I'll match the prize money. That's $100,000 total." A woman stood up across the hall. "I'm Sarah Chen from the Chen Foundation. We'll contribute another $50,000. More people started standing, offering money, support, connections. Maria looked overwhelmed. She had expected maybe a few people to clap politely. She hadn't expected this. The maestro took her hand again. "Maria," he said, "let me help you. I'm 73 years old. I've conducted the greatest orchestras in the world. But tonight you reminded me why I became a musician in the first place. Not for glory, but for this, for the moment when music touches someone's soul. I want to be part of your program." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that? A famous conductor like you would help a janitor's music program? You're not just a janitor," the maestro said firmly. "You're a musician who happens to clean hospitals." "There's a difference," the head judge spoke again. "We've made a decision. We're creating a new category for this competition, starting tonight. It will be called the Phoenix Award, for musicians who return to music after life has taken them away from it. Maria Kowalski Delgado will be our first recipient." The applause this time was overwhelming. But Maria wasn't done. She had more to say. "There's something else," she said when the noise died down. "I want to keep my job at the hospital. I know that sounds crazy, but those people are my friends. The patients know me. The other janitors, the nurses, they're my family now. I don't want to leave them." Someone in the audience laughed, not meanly, but in surprise. "You want to keep cleaning toilets when you could be playing concerts?" Maria smiled. "You don't understand. When you clean hospitals, you see life and death every day. You see courage and fear. You see families saying goodbye and babies being born. All of that makes the music mean more. If I only lived in concert halls, I might forget what music is for." She turned to the maestro. "I'll play concerts, but only special ones. Concerts for hospitals, for nursing homes, for schools in poor neighborhoods. And I'll teach, but not at fancy conservatories. I'll teach in community centers and churches, wherever there's a piano and a child who wants to learn." The maestro nodded, understanding. "You're choosing to be a different kind of musician." "I'm choosing to be useful," Maria corrected. "Music saved me once when David was dying. It gave me something beautiful when everything was ugly. Now I want to give that to others." 6 months passed. Maria stood in the same Carnegie Hall, but this time she was on stage as the featured soloist. She wore a proper evening gown that her daughters had bought for her. They sat in the front row, crying and proud. They had finally learned about their mother's past, about the sacrifice she had made for their father and for them. The hall was full, but it looked different from usual. Yes, there were rich patrons in expensive clothes, but there were also rows of hospital workers in their best clothes. There were children from the Bronx and Queens, kids who had started taking piano lessons through Maria's program. There were patients from the cancer ward, some in wheelchairs, some with IV poles given special permission to attend. The Maestro, now the program's honorary director, walked to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is special. We're here to celebrate not just music, but the power of music to transform lives. 6 months ago, a janitor reminded us that talent can exist anywhere, that beauty can come from unexpected places. Tonight, that same woman, Maria Delgado, will perform with the New York Philharmonic. He paused. But first, I want you to know what she's accomplished in these 6 months. The Kowalski Delgado music program has already enrolled 300 children from low-income families. We have volunteer teachers giving free lessons. We have donated pianos in 20 community centers. And Maria herself plays weekly concerts in hospitals, nursing homes, and schools. He smiled at Maria. She still works at Mount Sinai Hospital. She still cleans the children's ward. But now officially she's also their artist in residence. She plays for the patients every morning at 6 before her cleaning shift starts. Maria walked to the piano. Before she sat down, she spoke to the audience. Tonight, I dedicate this performance to all the invisible people. The ones who clean your offices, who cook your food, who care for your children. We all have dreams. Sometimes life doesn't let us follow them the way we planned. But that doesn't mean the dreams die. They just wait for their time. She sat at the piano and began to play. This time it was Chopin, a piece she had played when she won the competition all those years ago. But now it was different. Now it had the weight of life in it. Every note told a story of love, loss, survival, and redemption. In the audience, a young girl from the program watched with wide eyes. She had started piano lessons just 2 months ago. Her mother worked 3 jobs and could never have afforded lessons before. The girl watched Maria's hands move across the keys and thought, if she can do it, maybe I can too. That's what Maria had wanted all along. Not fame for herself, but hope for others. As she played, she thought about David, how proud he would be. She thought about her daughters, successful and kind. She thought about the children in the hospital who fell asleep to her music. The music filled Carnegie Hall once again, but this time it was different. This time it wasn't just a performance. It was a promise that beauty exists everywhere, that talent doesn't care about social class, that music belongs to everyone. When Maria finished playing, the applause lasted for 10 minutes. But she didn't care about the applause. She cared about the little girl in row 15 who was crying because she had never heard anything so beautiful. She cared about the janitor from her hospital who had come in his only suit. She cared about the dying patient who had found peace in the music. This was her new beginning, but it was also a continuation. She was still Maria the janitor. She was still Maria the mother. She was still Maria the widow. But now she was also Maria the teacher, Maria the performer, Maria the bringer of music to those who needed it most. And that, she knew, was exactly who she was meant to be.